and the composition. We ended on the next slide, but I just kind of wanted to summarize because this is kind of the where we're at as far as discussion on this lesson. Sorry, I was eating a breakfast of champions. Are there any prayer requests? Anybody that's not already on our list that we should be praying for? All right. Not hearing anything. Let's get ready to bow our heads. Open the class with a prayer. Holy God, we come before you and we thank you for this beautiful day. We thank you for the rain that signals the coming change in seasons. We thank you for this week and all the things you've blessed us with. Even in the trials and tribulations, we know that your word says that we should continually give you praise through the good times and the bad, and we do that forever and ever. We ask that you watch over those who are ill and who are unable to attend today, but are thinking of you and us. We think of them and we lift them up to you, those who we've mentioned countless times before. Not just the physical things, Lord, but the mental issues and just the situations they find themselves in, whether it's economics or employment or prison or anything like that. We lift up the widows and the orphans, and we're mindful of them as your word asks us to be. We hope and we pray that our actions are a daily sacrifice to you, and they honor you in our thoughts and our deeds. We ask that you watch over us, you open our minds as we open your book, and we learn a little bit more about your world and your people and your word. We are mindful that your Son fulfilled all prophecies and came through for us, and we are eternally grateful for that opportunity to come before you through his name and in his blood. We praise you and give you glory. We ask that your Spirit fill us in grace, peace, and mercy, and that we bring that to the world and not the world to us. Pray this all through Christ's holy name. Amen. All right, so we are going to continue our scholarly analysis or understanding of the composition of the current text as we have it. The composition, and we did talk briefly before. There is a traditional dating. It goes all the way back to the middle of the 1400s BCE. It's the traditional dating of the writings. The traditional dating post-exile specifically has 4 or 5 books, maybe 6, 6 books that are composed after the exile, but majority of the writings of the Old Testament traditionally were written or considered to have been written pre-exile. Obviously, as we've discussed, the problem with that being that writing is very difficult to not only do, because there's not a lot of people who can write, but just the availability of the text and the ability, what to write on. So there's a lot of factors in that challenge that, according to scholars who study this. The current scholarly consensus does identify writings that are older than post-exile. Writings that are older than post-exile, but they're not whole compositions. So it's not like somebody sat down, or Moses sat down and wrote the book of Genesis or the book of Exodus at one sitting. And that kind of makes sense if we really think about it. I mean, from a human context, we know that authors and writers today, it's very rare that you're going to write a composition, write a book with no errors. And again, this is the scholarly consensus, in one sitting like that. So, the scholarly position is that portions of these books are written at different times and composed and compiled together at a later date. The earliest, for a number of reasons, are these fragments, and we read Exodus 15, 1 through 18 last time. Just a praise to God, praise to Adonai for his deliverance after the crossing of the Red Sea. They believe that that is probably, scholars today believe that that is probably the oldest portion of the Hebrew text that we have, that was composed probably at the earliest times. Again, if you did get a chance, or you do get a chance to look at these other fragments, these other sections, you will notice a theme to all of them. These are all praise texts. So they're all poetry that praises Adonai, that praises God. And they are sections that are obviously original or oldest for that very reason. It's just like our kids. What are the oldest things that they have, or that they can, what do we teach them first? Rhymes and little sayings. Well, in the fundamental sense, these praise portions, these praise sections, are fundamental acknowledgement that God is God, that Adonai is the Lord of Israel, and he is the God of the world. So you developed, that's the foundation, that we're saying that God is who he is. Then you start developing these stories. You get these compositions of longer texts. So you get the book of Amos, and you get Isaiah, the first portion of Isaiah. You talk about Hosea and Micah. With the exception of that Isaiah section, you realize that most of these initial compositional writings are shorter, much shorter than the book of Genesis, much shorter than the law. And again, as we talked about last time, it's not that the law wasn't written down. We just don't have a consensus that indicates that the law was compiled at one point in total, as they say, the fancy word, in total, that it wasn't just written down at one point. Part of it is we don't have, as we've discussed before, we don't have evidence of it. There's a number of other reasons. But there's good belief that these 4 books, or 3 books in portion of Isaiah, are written 740 to 700. What's important to understand is at this point in time, you have the beginning of the destruction of Israel, the northern kingdom. It's around that time that you have that destruction. So you're starting to get people moving down to Judea. And this is not really relevant to this class. It is. Everything I say is relevant to this class. But there is a movement, consensus, position of scholars that believe that, and it's not a majority, but it is growing, that believe that Israel and Judea were actually separate kingdoms. They were separate kingdoms, but they were never interrelated, in the sense that they were initially, but when they split, when they became the southern kingdom and the northern kingdom, they completely stopped talking, and they completely became separate peoples who had separate beliefs and separate deities, minor deities, because the reality is the evidence that has been uncovered through archaeological excavations indicates that many of these buildings, many of these homes, and again, a lot of this is outside of Jerusalem, have minor gods. And we see that in the Old Testament. We see that in the scripture, where the prophets are chastising the people for maintaining these minor idols. that their Asherah and their Baal gods, that they are still participating in that. So there is some evidence to that. It's easy, at least for me it was, to believe that if you were a Jew, if you were an Israelite, even back at this time, you were faithful, and it was fundamental, and it is who you were, and there was no difference to that. Obviously, that was my initial viewpoint. My viewpoint has changed. I'm not going to say that they were separate. I don't ascribe to that theory, but part of it I do, because they are separate peoples. They are separate kingdoms, and they had separate action. They had separate environmental things that caused them to act ways that were different. It's just like Missourians act different than Texans in some ways. And I only say that because I grew up in Texas. I live in Missouri. We have different fundamental, what's important to us. Those fundamental differences influence these fundamental writings. And, and that's one of the things that scholars use to differentiate or to identify how these things or when these things were written. And again, as I've discussed before, and I will continue to discuss, they don't have the luxury of believing in prophecy and foreknowledge. So everything that scholars write as far as consensus and analysis is that these are always written post whatever action they've described. That's their belief. So you get a little bit further down, you have the Exodus, and the Israelite Exodus, which is after the northern kingdom is destroyed. You have Zephaniah, Habakkuk, Deuteronomy, and these histories, because people are trying to memorialize their history before it goes away. That's the scholarly belief. They have now lost their homes, so the ones who can write, the scribes, are writing these things down in exile in Judea, in Moab, and Ammon, in these other countries to the east, or in Egypt, because we don't really have a location. Because as I said, the oldest documents we have are dated 150, 200 BCE, from the Qumran area. We don't have any other evidence that indicates that these were written, that these are describing anything other than we want to write our history down before we forget it. So, and then you get to Nahum, and then right as the southern kingdom is exiled to, or is in exile, you have Obadiah, you have Deuteronomy, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Isaiah, and the Psalms. Then you're still, now we're talking about 538, we're talking about the return of the Israelites, or the Jews, to Judea and to Jerusalem. And it's something we kind of talked about, we've talked about recently. We've seen, and I don't have a picture of that. So we have a traditional view in our mind, at least I do, of Israel, or Judea. And it looks like modern day Israel. Would I be does anybody disagree with that general idea? The reality is, if you get a chance, and this is just because it popped up in my brain, if you look at what is considered the West Bank of Judea or Israel today, and encompass part of Jerusalem, that's roughly the size of Judea when they return. It's not the same size. It's not even the same size that it was when they were at exile. It is a much smaller community, because it's more of a community than a country, because it's still a vassal kingdom to the Babylonians or to the Assyrians. So you have this much smaller return, much smaller enclave that is now really focusing on, let's get the Torah together, let's get our history together, and start developing the rest of the canon. So roughly at return of so that if you remember the traditional view is post-exile, the first books written are Ezra and Nehemiah. This order indicates that during the return you have the composition of the Torah, which, I mean, for me logically makes sense. You've lost for 80 years, even let's suppose that the Torah was written down prior to the exile. For 80 years, you didn't have it. And there's a very good chance that it was destroyed or messed with or torn apart or erased because some of the stuff is written in stone. And there's vast evidence that conquering nations it happened all the time in Egypt. Conquering nations or conquering pharaohs or conquering governments would erase the stone and write over it. Could have happened, probably did happen. I would be surprised if it didn't. So supposing that the Torah is composed and it is in scrolls, it's probably not together. It's probably destroyed, it's probably disseminated in portions. It doesn't come back together until post-exile. So you have the Torah put together, which is great. And the reason we can at least affirmatively know that date is because there has never, even in 70 AD, when the fourth temple was destroyed, Herod's temple was destroyed, the Romans did not destroy the writings. The writings were preserved. They were taken out of Jerusalem beforehand. The Torah was taken out. So we have a continuing tradition that there's evidence of, that, hey, the Torah has not been destroyed or has to have been rewritten. There were portions of the Torah that were retained. We don't have any of that evidence at this point of history. So that's kind of one of the analysis, one of the thoughts, prevailing thoughts, theories as to why we don't have good evidence that the Torah was composed in total prior to the exile, because we just don't have that continuing evidence. You have Haggai and Zephaniah, and then you have more, and again, most of these are prophets. You have Malachi and Joel in the late 400s. And according to this, it's not until the 300s. And I'll be honest, I don't necessarily subscribe to that. I think that they are written about 100 years before this compositional date is. So I'm thinking about 50 to 80 years after the exile that these stories are written, or these books are written. But this one has it as Ezra and Nehemiah in the middle of the 300s. I think it was early, so when I say early in BCE, I mean the later numbers. So like 480, 475 BCE is Ezra and Nehemiah. Now, I'm not a scholar in that sense anyway, in any shape or form, but that's my perspective. I just think there's a lot of evidence that indicates that they were written a little bit earlier than that. Maybe contemporaneously with Malachi and Joel, but certainly not that late. But that's what this list shows. Then you have Job, Ecclesiastes, Song of Songs, and Jonah in case people were not, and I think I did mention this last week, the story of Job itself is not unique to Israel. There has been a version of Job floating around in the Near East, along with the flood stories, for millennia. We have a similar story in Babylonia that we have documents of that indicate a very similar story of a man who is pious. He follows their God, and their God is challenged by, and in that case it's Zoroastrianism, so Marduk challenges the God and says, give me, he's only pious because you treat him well. You give him all the blessings. Let's challenge him. So that story is not unique, but the story of Job itself, as we understand it, is compiled in the Israelite form around 300, 200. Then we start getting into the Apocrypha. So we start getting into writings that are no longer part of our canon, traditional canon. You have Tobit, which we'll talk about, Sirach, talk about Daniel. Daniel is composed much later, according to almost every modern scholar, because of its references to certain actions that have occurred either at the exile or at the return or immediately post-exile. So most scholars believe that Daniel is the last written book that we have that has been considered canon. Then you have Maccabees, Judith, and the rest of the Apocrypha that are written, at least the major books. Because there are, as we talked about, there is a book called Third Maccabees, there's a book called Fourth Maccabees, there's a bunch of other apocryphal books that we'll talk about in the coming weeks. Any questions about this stuff so far? Comments or anything like that? Just to let you know, so that's a rough computer model of the Second Temple. So this is the restored temple area. It's not a very good picture. Honestly, the little drawing at the very bottom, the sketch, I think is a much better version, but obviously it's not blown up that way for whatever reason. All right, so we talked about all the books that we know. Let's talk about the books we don't know or that are not familiar with. So, in no particular order, we have the apocryphal books. Many of these books, not all of them, are considered deuterocanonical, semi-important or semi-canonical. In no particular order, you have Tobit, Judith, Greek Esther, and when I say Greek Esther, it's actually just a little section. It's like 2 chapters that the Eastern Orthodox include in their book of Esther that Protestants do not. So it's kind of like the ending. And a couple months ago, I read from Psalm 151, which you see down there. That was a psalm that just didn't make it into the canon for whatever reason. But it's there. So it's considered apocryphal. The Book of Wisdom, which is very much like Ecclesiastes. It's one of those wisdom books, Proverbs, Psalms. Sirach, Baruch, the letter of Jeremiah, which again is another section of Jeremiah that is not included in the traditional canon, but was found attached to or added to some of the books of Jeremiah that have been uncovered. The prayer of Azariah, Susanna, Bel and the Dragon. So the prayer of Azariah and Bel and the Dragon are actually parts of Daniel that are not included in our traditional canon of Daniel, but are considered canonical or deuterocanonical in some denominations, which is why it sounds weird, because Bel and the dragon, who's ever heard of a dragon in the Bible? It's actually, there's mentions of beasts, which some people translate as dragon. So anyways, 1st, 2nd Maccabees, which are historical, more of the historical documents. It's a lot of what scholars who are teaching a class similar to this focus on, because it talks about the history of Israel that we don't really get to hear. So we'll spend some time with the Maccabees. 1st Esdras, the prayer of Manasseh, Psalm 151, 3rd Maccabees, 2nd Esdras, and 4th Maccabees. And that picture is actually, I wish I had blown it up better. It is all that remains of a Jewish synagogue / Egyptian temple that was repurposed into a synagogue in not Alexandria. I cannot remember the name of the city off the top of my head, but it's a beautiful site. It's really cool. Just one of the things I like. All right, so let's talk about these Dead Sea Scrolls. So technically, Qumran Scrolls, Dead Sea Scrolls are the same thing, but not technically they are not, because it is not one. We don't know if they are just one community, because these documents, these paragraphia, these little sections of writings, and many of them, most of them, are about less than the size of a credit card. It's very rare that we do have the Isaiah scroll, which is almost the entire content of the book of Isaiah in one giant scroll. There's only one of them. Yes, sir. We're talking like little portions of writings that people have had to like puzzle and put together. So you may have, for example, you may have the book of Esther, you may have chapter 1, verses 9 through 11. And you don't even have all of 9 through 11. You're missing the first word and like the last 3 words, but you know it's there. And you got to put those things together. They're found in the same general location, but because the paper deteriorates or the papyri deteriorates, it cracks, and when you try to get it out of the thing, it falls apart even more. So it is there is this the thought that when the Qumran scrolls were found, that they were found by Bedouin tribe people who live in the area who were looking for just stuff. The rumor is that, they burned some of them. That didn't happen here. That was the Nag Hammadi Library, which is a completely different set of documents that are New Testament and Apocrypha documents that were found in Nag Hammadi, Egypt. Those Bedouins did burn 3 scrolls, which is absolutely terrible, but they didn't know what they were doing. So, a brief history of the Qumran scrolls. So, in 46, some young boys are just looking for things to either burn or to sell in the area. One of them falls into a cave. He fell in, and when he fell in, he saw some jars. Told his 2 other friends, hey, we found some jars, or there's some jars down here, help me get them. So they pull these jars out, and they open them up, and they see these scrolls in here, or these documents. So they take them back to their village, and for a couple of weeks, they've taken them out of the jars, and they're just hanging there, trying to figure out what to do with them. Eventually, one of the elders of their tribe says, well, let's see if somebody wants to buy them from us. We can make a little bit of money off of it. they contact some people, those people contact other people. Eventually, it gets to, people don't want to buy them, but eventually somebody does, and when he buys them, initially, the initial thought is the writings on there, from what I've read, it was determined some of the village older ladies, and I don't know why it said ladies, I think it was everybody, said that this is witchcraft, that these are spells and we should get rid of them. They're probably bad luck. Luckily, they don't destroy them. They eventually get somebody to buy them. Somebody in an American, and I can't remember the name off the top of my head, he identifies some of these as possibly ancient Hebrew writings. He purchases some of them, not all of them, from the tribe. Then there's this years-long battle with these other antiquity dealers. One of the things that if you take an anthropology class or you know somebody who's an anthropology major, at least when I went to undergrad, you have to take at least 2 classes in preservation, because the reality is a lot of people find these things. It's just like the gold, these treasure hunters. They do more damage to history and to anthropology and archaeology than people who accidentally burn documents. So there was these antiquities dealers who were in possession of some of the scrolls because they had bought them. The scholarly people try to buy them. Eventually they do buy them. Initially they are distributed throughout the world. 99% of all the Dead Sea Scrolls are now in possession of the Israel Antiquities Department, the Israeli Antiquities Division. There is ongoing international legal lawsuits between Israel and Jordan, because the Qumran area was technically part of Jordan at the time that these scrolls were discovered, and that portion of Jordan was lost in the 1967 Israeli war. So since then, since 1967, there has been ongoing legal battles between Israel and Jordan in regards to this. The funny thing is that's a legal thing. Almost every scholar, Israeli, Jordanian, and the rest, don't care. They just want access, and they do have access to these documents for the most part. So, that being said, to summarize, so they were found at the Qumran caves. The other thing I said, so the difference between the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Qumran Scrolls. The Qumran Scrolls technically belong to the Qumran community. We're still not sure. Everybody likes to say that they are Essenes. There's no definitive answer that they were a group of Essenes. Some scholars believe that they were Jewish temple priests who had taken, during some war or whatever, some threat to the temple, took these scrolls and these documents and took them out there for safekeeping. So there's still debate as to who they belong to. The other thing is the reason they're called the Dead Sea Scrolls, and that's probably a more accurate description, is it's not one set of caves. There's about 150 caves in that area that had all contained at least one jar with some documents in it. And it's pretty evident that at least one of the documents did not belong to the Qumran community, because it was a list of, and I don't remember the specifics, but it's like a list of information that clearly indicated that that document would not have belonged to any Jewish society, or at least pious Jewish society like we have with the rest of the Qumran documents. That one document is dated to around 160, 150 BCE. But again, if I say Qumran, if I say Dead Sea, That's my indication. They're generally the same documents, or at least the same group of documents together. So they're discovered over a period of 10 years between 46 and 56. There actually have been subsequent discoveries, but nothing of significance. No jars, but they have found some documents, scraps on the floor or whatever during excavation. At the Qumran Caves near Ain Feshka in the West Bank, on the northern shore of the Dead Sea. So it's actually on the northwestern. So if you see the Dead Sea here, it is about 5 miles on the northwest corner of the Dead Sea. The Dead Sea Scroll, they date from the 3rd century BCE, so the 200s, to the 1st century CE. So this is, again, it's not just documents that were written before the time of Christ. There is evidence, and again, it's way technical, that indicates that some of these documents were written at least contemporaneously with the time of Christ. They include the oldest surviving manuscripts of the entire books, including that have been included in the biblical canons, including Deuterocanonical manuscripts of Second Temple Judaism and extra biblical books, with the exception of the Book of Esther. The Book of Esther is not in this collection. It's the only book not there. At the same time, it helps to understand Judaism at the time that these documents are written, but also helps to understand the emergence of Christianity and rabbinic Judaism, which is what we get after the fall of the temple, because there is no longer priests. All you have are rabbis. And as we probably all know, the word rabbi means teacher. Priest is a completely different function. The Dead Sea Scrolls also include similar findings from elsewhere in the Judean desert, which are of some later centuries. About 15,000 scrolls and scroll fragments are held in the shrine of the book at the Israel Museum located in Jerusalem. And the cool thing is if you Google Shrine of the Book at the Israel Museum, you can actually view the Dead Sea Scrolls online. They do not have all of them, but they do have a good number of them. Shrine of the Book, or you can just Google Dead Sea Scrolls online, and it will send you the link. It's really fascinating. And if you're into social media like Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, those things, or YouTube Shorts, they do tours, and there are tours of the shrine of the museum. And it's not just biblical tours, so if you're interested in museums at all, and this is me as an anthropologist giving a general plug, most museums nowadays have online tours where they will, if you go to their official website, they will take you on a general tour. St. Louis Museum of Art has one. It's fascinating. Every now and then I just sit there and look at some of the medieval paintings and imagine, man, I wish I could paint. I painted a boat once and won first place in first grade. That's about the extent of my art, though most of you don't know that my stepdaughter, Stephanie, who just had a baby last year, she was an art major, along with a couple other things. And she's a fantastic painter. I wish I had her skills or whatever, because it's cool. So, off that topic, Dead Sea Scrolls. We're going to finish a few minutes early on that. Are there questions? Comments? So, plan for the next couple weeks. So I don't know if I will, the Sunday after March 4th, I may not be able to give class. I haven't quite figured that out. That's when my surgery's on March 4th. But I should be fine for the next couple of classes. My intent is to go through a summary of the post-exile books that we have in our canon. Ezra and Nehemiah, some of the minor prophets, a couple of the Psalms, that we have a good idea were written post-exile, and some of Daniel. And we're going to go through a timeline of those books because we have them, we're somewhat familiar with them, and we're going to kind of summarize what they talk about because, again, they are broad strokes, talking about art. They are broad strokes of history of what happens post-exile. Once we get through that, then we're going to go through the timeline again. We're going to look at the timeline, and then I'm going to provide, and we're going to start talking about some of these deuterocanonical books. And we're going to go through them in a timeline order coming up to the New Testament. And we're going to talk about why scholars believe they were not included. Because again, as I've explained before, the Hebrew canon itself was not compiled or coagulated until the 400s. Okay? So we've got another 800, 900 years from post-exile to where the rabbis have decided these are the important books, these other books aren't all that important, so we're not going to include them. And we're going to talk about why they did that, or at least why scholars think they did that. And did these books have any influence? They obviously had some influence if they are included in the Qumran documents, if they're included in the Dead Sea Scrolls. They had some influence. Okay? And then we're going to talk about some books that are in the Qumran library that are not considered canonical or deuterocanonical at all, such as the Scroll of War and the Qumran, I forgot what it's called. Basically, it's the rules of the society. We have those documents that tell us what are the rules. It's very much like reading the Torah, the law. So these are the rules that you have to live in the society with us. And we're going to talk about why they separated. Why are they not in Jerusalem? If these documents are important, if these people were pious, why are they not with the other pious people in Jerusalem? Or were the people in Jerusalem pious to begin with? We don't know. Or maybe we do know, and we'll talk about it. Any questions? Comments? Sneezes? Coughs? It's that time of year. All right. Thank you, guys. Love you all.